Hi, I'm Peter Jones, Chartered Surveyor, author and property investor, and welcome back to this short series of videos where we're thinking about different property strategies and crucially how we're going to find our properties. And in this video we're going to be thinking about how we actually find our flip properties. So we want to find a property which we can flip. In other words, we want to find a property which we can buy and then sell on. So how do we do that? Do we literally just walk straight into an estate agent and say, I'm looking for properties to flip? Well, you probably wouldn't do that, but what you could do, very common sense, not rocket science, is go into the estate agents and say, I'm looking for properties which I can do up. Why? Because probably, depending upon what your strategy is, and remember flips, there's a couple of sub-strategies. You could be flipping to other investors or you could be flipping to owner-occupiers. But probably the best way of doing a flip and adding the value either way is to find a property which you can do up. So if you go into the estate agents and look specifically and ask specifically for properties which need work doing to them, that's probably going to be a good starting point. Another question which I think we should always be asking estate agents anyway is, do you have any properties that are empty at the moment? Now this I think is a great question, because it's going to uncover so many different opportunities. Now, it often happens to be the case that properties which are empty often need work doing to them. Now, I don't know why that is. There's no rhyme or reason for that. It's perfectly possible that a property in good order could be vacant, but it just happens to be the way of things that I suppose when people move out, particularly if they're moving out in a hurry or under distress, that they don't have time necessarily to fix the property up and to make it nice and new and bright and shiny. So it's very often the case that the two go hand in hand, but there's no rhyme or reason to that. I'm not saying that it's a rule, it's not something which you can always assume, it just happens to be sometimes it works that way. So we can certainly ask if there's any properties which are empty. Now from a flipping point of view, that's a great thing to ask anyway, because one of the reasons why properties or particular properties can be good for flipping is because you can buy them at the right price. Now, it's not all just about doing the property up, although that can be a good way of adding the value which can help you to create the margin. The other part of the equation, as we saw earlier, is to buy the property cheaply. And very often we're going to be buying a property cheaply because the seller needs to sell quickly. And this is often down to the seller being somewhat distressed or motivated. Motivated is perhaps the better word. Distressed sounds awful, isn't it? And distress can be quite emotive and maybe makes people think about taking advantage of people. I'm certainly not suggesting taking advantage of anybody, but what I am suggesting is looking for situations where the seller is highly motivated to sell because they've probably got things going on in their life which are more important for them to resolve than hanging onto a property and trying to get the very last penny out of the purchase price, trying to squeeze a buyer for the last penny. It just isn't going to work that way. They probably just need to get rid of the property, and perhaps the terms on which they get rid of the property is more important than the price that they achieve for the property. And quite often, one of the most important terms which they may be thinking about is how quickly you can actually buy the property. So if you can buy the property quickly and you can get them out of whatever their problem happens to be, then you'll get a decent price in return. It's a quid pro quo. So always be asking, have you got any properties which are empty? Because very often properties which are empty reflect the fact that the vendor is going to be motivated because there's something happening in their life which means that they need to move the property on quickly. An empty property is usually a cost to somebody. Somebody's having to pay out on that property. It may be that they're paying to maintain it. It may be that they're paying the utility bills. It may be that, if it's winter, they're running the heating, even though there's nobody there, to make sure that they don't get any burst pipes. It could be that they're paying council tax. So all of these are costs, and it may be that they just need to get rid and they want to get shot of the property. So ask if it's empty. What else can we do? Well, can we find our flip properties on Rightmove? Again, a great question, and I love Rightmove. Rightmove is the tool of choice for many property investors and property professionals. The problem with Rightmove is this though, this is the way that I see it. Can we find properties to flip on Rightmove? Well, at a very basic level we can go through and we can look at the photos on Rightmove, and maybe the photos will be a clue as to whether a property needs to be refurbished, for example. But the reality is that a good agent is probably going to want to take the very best pictures possible and show the property in the best possible light. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you can pick up a good refurb project just from the photos, unless the property is in such a horrible state that it's self-evident. But there are plenty of properties which actually could do with a refurb and which would be suitable for flipping after the refurb, and it's difficult to spot from the photos. So that's the first problem. But this is the main problem that I see with Rightmove. The reality is that, as I've just said, a lot of the properties which we want to buy to flip on, we're going to buy them because we can get them at a decent price, and that might not be because they need to be refurbed. Now, it'd be great if they need to be refurbed as well, but perhaps the main thing is we're going to get them at the decent price because the vendor is motivated, because the seller has something in their life which means that they need to sell quickly. So what would make a vendor want to sell quickly? Well, they could have other financial difficulties. Maybe they run their own business and their business is in trouble and they need to raise some funds quickly. Maybe they just got divorced and as a couple they want to separate. It could be all sorts of reasons. They've just been relocated. There's 101 reasons which we can just call life. Life happens and they need to get rid. But, and this is the thing about Rightmove, Rightmove isn't going to tell you the motivation of the seller. All Rightmove is going to do is show you a photo or some photos of the property, give you a brief description and tell you the current asking price. And it doesn't give you any sort of a clue or indication as to whether there's a deal to be done. You may buy the property at a much better price than the asking price because you may be able to negotiate with the vendor through the agent, presumably, and get a good price. Or it may be that the seller isn't motivated at all and they're sticking out for the asking price or even offers over the asking price. You don't know. Rightmove isn't going to tell you. That is very subtle, isn't it? A nuance, but you're not going to know. So that's one reason why when people tell me that they're looking for flips by going through Rightmove, I don't think you're going to find that many deals. You might find one or two, as I say, if you come across some photos which show the property is self-evidently needs refurbing, that could be a deal to be done. But most of our refurbs, probably it's not going to be that simple. And you need to know the motivation of the vendor. By the way, if you're new to property and you want to get into property, or if you're already in property but you want to expand your portfolio and accelerate your property business and your property success, then I want to recommend to you my best-selling ebook, The Successful Property Investor's Strategy Workshop, which you can find at my website, www.thepropertyteacher.co.uk. And in it, I take you through how I started in property. So I show you everything that I did in order to create my portfolio and to create my portfolio income. And I literally started with no money at all. Now, sometimes when I say that, people sort of roll their eyes and say, well, that's just all hype, Peter, but it's absolutely true. I was made redundant, I didn't have any savings to fall back on. I had to start really from scratch with no money. And I'll take you through how I did that in the Successful Property Investor's Strategy Workshop, and how in my first 4 years I bought £2 million worth of property. Now, of course, I didn't stop there. I've gone on to expand my portfolio and I've bought many more properties since. But that first 4 years was really the critical period where I put into place the processes and the systems which allowed me to do what I now do, which is why my ebook covers that period, because in it I'm going to show you everything which I did right, and crucially I'm also going to show you everything that I did wrong so that you can avoid my mistakes. And hopefully by avoiding my mistakes you can actually achieve far more quickly. So you can get £2 million worth of property far more quickly than 4 years. So go over to my website, www.thepropertyteacher.co.uk, and click on Learning with Peter, and you'll see the link for the Successful Property Investor's Strategy Workshop. Until next time, here's to successful property investing.